Stephanie Metz. I'm a sculptor based in San Jose, California, and I work primarily with wool and felt. I stumbled across the material almost 20 years ago and fell in love with it, and I've been exploring it ever since. I never would have predicted that I'd be working with fiber, period. I always enjoyed clay quite a bit, and in college I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my art yet. I was really interested in a very classical sculpture education, so studying the human figure anatomically, and just learning all the classical techniques for approaching form. And it was through a weird, happy accident that a coworker of mine showed me a magazine article about making felted drink cozies. So taking a cup, wrapping it in wool, dunking it in hot soapy water and rubbing it a lot, and you'd get this freestanding thing. And it just sounded like alchemy, like, wow, transforming one material into something fundamentally different. And so I went to a yarn shop, and this was a couple years after I was out of college, and I was sort of unmoored. I didn't really have a place to work on the kind of messy things that I wanted to do. So I went to this yarn shop and I said, hey, I'm a sculptor, I want to try this felting thing. And the woman there said, oh, you don't want to do wet felting. It's messy, it's imprecise. Here's a book on needle felting. And lo and behold, there's this book where this woman has written about using these specialized tools that come from industry, these really sharp notch needles, and you stab at wool and you can shape it three-dimensionally. So I bought some wool and I started working right away, and I made this small figure out of brown wool. It's in my studio to this day, the very first wool thing that I ever made. It's interesting, I can take it out of its little bell jar. So it's just a little seated figure, and it's interesting to me now that it's so much squishier and less rigid than a lot of my subsequent work. It's just, it has some give to it, but it also really does, have detail, and that's just hair. It's so crazy to me. And it was just so weird and different and unusual, and I just started falling in love with it right then. I didn't really think that it would be my real art. 20 years later, I'm still exploring it and playing with it. It has become my thing. I started playing with this material. It sort of gave me permission to play around with some of the subjects that I hadn't necessarily felt comfortable exploring as real art. It sort of opened the door for me to realize there's no rules about this stuff. There's not even any real tradition with this fiber technique the way there are with a lot of other ones that are very heavy-handed in the way you do it. So I was just kind of making stuff up. And I realized that my ongoing fascination with the way people shape the world around them and the animals around them through things like breeding and domestication were the kind of thing that I could replicate or play with in this material. So these are some of the, so I have these 12 different hanging pod-like pieces that are sort of loosely based on different organic shapes in the world, but they have different feels to them. So you can see they're huggable size. And they have different materials underneath. So in some cases I've stitched an industrial felt form that is more kind of squishy, that's stuffed, so then when I felt over it, it has kind of the squish to it. This one that has these concave areas also has a form inside that's made of stitched industrial felt, but in order to stuff that without having these pop out, I used expanding spray foam, which holds its shape and becomes rigid, but then not enough to pop them out. So a lot of experimenting with how I can use different materials to get the effects that I want. Here is a model that I made for this piece. So I carved it out of styrofoam to try to figure out how the heck I would make a pattern that would be this shape. It almost looks like squished balls from like the pool. Yeah. I can't even think of the word. Like beach balls. It almost looks like squished beach balls, but different. So I had to cut pieces of flat felt, and wherever they would curve too much, I knew that was where I had to trim them. And then I numbered them all so I could keep track of them again later. And then took these off and traced them larger and stitched a bigger version of it, and that's what's inside this. I have two kids, they're 16 and 13. And a spouse who I also love to spend time with. So it's interesting. It never feels like it's quite balanced. I'm always trying to take care of this and take care of that. And I think in the long run it works out because I'm very interested in doing each of the different parts of my life. And I think my whole family knows that if I don't get some time in the studio, I'm much less pleasant to be with. So I have to kind of take care of that and guard that space and make time and space for making things, because that's what sort of soothes me and helps me process life in general. It's a constantly moving, like the balance is always shifting. I am trying to give the weight of what I'm doing to whatever I'm currently doing. And I tend to be pretty good at focusing on when I'm in the studio, working on the things in the studio, and then, for set amounts of time, and then doing the home thing. I think as a female, anything, you get a lot of pressure to do it all. And to do it all in a happy, smiley, giving way, which can be really frustrating. When I was first pregnant also, 2 different artist friends said things like, "Oh, but you're doing so well," and "Oh, too bad." That was just like a chip on my shoulder then, like, oh, so I can't make art and raise a human being? And so even though it was really hard, especially at the beginning when they were little, I was still making work, I was still getting it out in the world, I just wasn't going out in the world as much. And I remember, a couple years in, I had someone say, "Oh, I thought you'd moved away. I haven't seen you at any of these, local art things." Well, that's because I'm exhausted by the end of the week. But I am making work and keeping myself sane and getting it out in the world. I'm just, the social side of it was the thing that really seemed to suffer for trying to do everything. And I'm making a 3-dimensional object. I'm poking with the needle, and the little fibers are moving depending on where I'm poking because of those notches. Where I'm drawing with wool, I'm actually usually sketching out my design first and transferring an outline by poking. And then I'm using some of this black fiber, in this case it's alpaca fiber, and I can draw by literally just poking the fibers through those holes that I've already made, or making new holes. And I usually start with the outline, and then I'll go through and fill in dark and light. And it's kind of like watercolor, where the white only comes from the paper. But unlike watercolor, if I make it too dark, I can just take some of the fiber off again. So you can see I could make it kind of more shaded in one place and less so in another, and just anchor it in place. And when I'm done, I have to peel the whole thing off because the fibers go through both sides. And they just kind of stay there suspended in the fiber, or in the paper. And I use a pretty thick paper so that it can have enough body to hold it. But I can do kind of simple little line drawings, and then things that have more complex shading. And that's just all the fiber on the surface of the paper. And I love it because from far away, it looks like it could be, like these ones are wool drawings too. It looks like it could be charcoal or ink. And then you get up close and you can see that it's actually fiber and then it's dimensional. And I love that extra layer of curiosity about the material itself. Inspired by the weird things that actually already exist in the world. So sometimes I feel like I'm just pushing it a little. These things are real. Look at that. It's so kind of grotesquely elegant and strange.
That's what that one.
Yeah, it's based off of this breed, where the head would kind of be hidden back there, but you don't need to know that. That's a real breed too. It's crazy. So I look at just the beautiful planes and shapes of different bones, and those find their way into my work. I had someone come in here and say, "Why is your work all about death?" I said, I don't think that it looks like it is, but I understand that for other people, seeing things like bones and skulls could read primarily that way, but I don't think that that's how I have presented it. I think it's a fascination with the underpinnings of life, and that's my entry point into it.
Yeah.
That's been one of the best parts of being an artist, is finding that things that I create and put out in the world can cause a connection with other people. And not everybody, and that's fine, but I find kindred spirits all the time through the things that I create. And so it took a journey to figure out that, just because I don't have other people's experiences, the ones that I do have are also worthy. And that my curiosity and sense of wonder at the world are things that connect with other people too. And I think a sense of experimentation and play and wonder and curiosity is really what drives my practice and comes up again and again throughout everything that I make. And it keeps me engaged, and hopefully people who encounter my work become engaged as well.